The Radio Misfits Podcast Network.
Hello and welcome to Planted with Sara Pion. I'm Sara Pion, your host, and today we have Angel Gambino on the podcast. I'm really excited to have her here. Over the last 20 years, Angel Gambino has been a servant leader in companies both big and small. She started her career as a public interest environmental lawyer before becoming a senior executive in large media and entertainment companies and a serial entrepreneur across 4 continents. She's been an active angel investor for the last 2 decades and hosts a community of angel investors and founders of early stage companies at Angel Club. Angel, welcome. And I'm just so glad to have you here. I'm always delighted just to talk to you in general, so there you go.
Yeah, it's just a good excuse to catch up. I love it. Thank you for having me.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. So I'm going to start with the question that I normally do, but what was your first experience with cannabis?
Sure. I think my first experience with cannabis was really when I was very, very young. Because my dad, would smoke pot kind of openly in front of me, so he'd have a joint when he was watching, Sunday football. And so I feel like in some ways that probably formed, either unconsciously or later consciously some of my, views towards cannabis. And he struggles with anxiety, and unfortunately, he also has a pretty bad temper. he's Sicilian, but so I put that disclaimer out there. But he told me from a very, very young age, that when he smoked, he said it relaxed him. And he would say, it makes me a little bit silly. And I could observe that in him. I could observe that, he was just more relaxed. He was more chilled out. And he was, a bit sillier. And as a young kid, I really appreciated that and thought it was funny. And so my first experience was really just kind of, observing, my dad and just, seeing kind of how it influenced, the way that he managed his anxiety. So I think, that wasn't my first experience using cannabis for myself, but it was my, the beginning of that relationship. And I was an athlete, and I was a pretty serious athlete. I ended up playing in the English Premier League as a soccer player and working with the U.S. women's national team at London 2012. And so, sports and my physical body, and my kind of, mental agility were kind of core part of my identity and my focus, because when I was younger, I wanted to get a soccer scholarship. And at that stage, in the late 80s, there were very, very few sports scholarships for women. They were kind of really emerging and growing then, but there certainly were very few for women's soccer. Soccer hadn't quite grown in popularity like it is today, and so I didn't partake for a long time, even though, I was around cannabis all the time, and I loved the way that it smelled, and I liked, how it helped my dad. It wasn't for me, because I looked at it as, at that stage, I wasn't aware of different ways that I could consume cannabis. So it was really about the smoking aspect. So I viewed it very much along the lines of, I shouldn't smoke because I'm an athlete. And, and I was young and didn't really know what my options were. And so I kind of aligned it with cigarettes at that stage. And I thought, okay, that's not something I want to do, because I need this great lung capacity and all that kind of stuff. And so then it wasn't really, I think, until probably, I think it was my last year. Yeah, it was actually my last year of college. And after my last season, we had just lost the national title. We came number 2 in the country, and we were done. And so I was a free bird, so to speak. And so, so then I just, I would start smoking with some other, students, and I just really enjoyed it. And, all the benefits that I saw for my father, I experienced, for myself. I was just, more relaxed and in a great mood, and just, really enjoyed it, recreationally at that stage. And so that was kind of, the beginning of my journey, so to speak.
It's interesting what you're saying around, the reasons why you didn't try it earlier, because when I've done interviews with other professionals that are also athletes, they've said very similar things. And now we're looking at, especially with CBD to THC ratios, like how restorative it can be after working out or, playing sports, or even they're talking more about like football players and brain injuries, and how CBD actually behaves as a neuroprotective to help fight against that too. And it's wonderful that we're learning more now, but of course we didn't have all the things available back then than we do now. I mean, geez, like 11 years ago in California, the products that were available just seem, for the most part, downright archaic outside of, just the buds themselves, which I miss big, beautiful, fragrant buds. I hope they come back someday,
Yeah. Yeah.
But
Yeah.
It's an
Yeah,
interesting
I
thing.
agree. I mean, there were we didn't have, well, first of all, we didn't have access even to the, basic stuff, but beyond that, we didn't have all of the different kinds of products that are available now. And also we weren't as informed, as you say. So, we didn't understand the basic differences between, CBD and THC, and, and how to get that kind of combination right, and all the different kinds of benefits. Yeah, and I agree. I think there are athletes, that I've worked with, like, Megan Rapinoe and her partner, who's a professional basketball player. They've got these, big athletes who are now aligning themselves with, with CBD brands, and, and because they see the benefits, as athletes. So it is interesting that, that other, professionals and athletes kind of, saw it the same. But, at that time, those were, the only options that we really knew about, or that were, readily accessible. But I'm just so relieved and grateful that we've got so many different options now. And there's still a lot to do in terms of educating consumers and politicians and, and lots of other people. But, that's kind of the purpose of, one of the purposes, of your podcast. And one of the benefits and the value is that, that people can now get so much access to high quality information and education around cannabis, that they can make, more informed choices, whether that's about, personal consumption and lifestyle, or it's about, federal and, state policies.
Right. And I feel like, good education creates sound policy, because the one thing that I've noticed when I've gone to other states, and even in California, when we were looking at legalization, and I was one of the chairs of the task force for San Francisco, I used to say, why are we reinventing the wheel? Why aren't we looking at the mistakes that other states have made, so we don't do those, and then glean from it what they've learned? And we have policy that in many ways is based on state culture, which is really strong. I've learned as I've done a lot of traveling in the past few years, and stigma. Like, even when I was at the Americans for Safe Access meeting the other night, and we were starting to dig into the MORE Act. And it's really interesting, some of the language that they even have in there, where I just pointed out that's some stigma-filled language. Like, for example, we're looking at, federal taxation on product, and they have in the MORE Act that if the product is stolen, that if it can't be proven beyond a doubt that it wasn't the fault of the owner or the staff of the owner, that they will be held responsible for the taxes on the lost product.
Yeah.
We don't do that in other industries.
Right, exactly. And yeah, I just feel like there's still a lot of misunderstanding and also just bias. Just, like culturally, we have to like unwind all this BS we've been, pumping out, for decades. So, and it's hard for people to kind of unlearn cultural indoctrination around, this topic and others. So, I do think we have a fair bit of work to do. And, and even in the policies and the way that, that you can operate, basic, delivery companies. I'm an investor in Ease. And when I look operationally at how these businesses have to operate from a regulatory standpoint, there are so many additional layers of what I believe to be unnecessary friction and cost built into these, business models based on, these kind of overarching principles and policies that when you look at it from, a pure business standpoint, just don't make sense. And so, and then you have to look at, okay, what are the real benefits to society in having some of these like draconian restrictive aspects of doing business? And you think, I just don't believe that the upside or the benefit to forcing lots of these different, cannabis companies to operate radically differently than even, alcohol companies, and which are arguably, more destructive. So, and that's another highly regulated industry. And so I'm not suggesting that it shouldn't be regulated, but I do think that, we need business to thrive, especially now as we're coming out of the pandemic. We need to support, small business owners. We need to support entrepreneurs who are trying to grow these companies. And so I think as much as we can, we should allow them to, to operate as freely as other companies, unless there are some specific aspects, to the product or the business, that need to have those kind of higher levels of, of regulation, and, and that's absolutely, acceptable.
Right. And then when you're looking at it from a social justice perspective, I mean, I'm going to tell you something that you already know. But I mean, with the mass incarcerations of Black and brown people, and where these draconian laws that they're putting together is just making the legacy market even larger. And so we're not giving people a chance to actually pivot and have legitimate businesses. And these are entrepreneurs.
Yeah. No, exactly. And, I think that, some of them are, have been successful because they're just like good hustlers, and every entrepreneur needs to be, a good hustler. At least, especially during, the early stages. And, and some of them will find this migration into, the, kind of legalized, regulatory framework more challenging for a lot of different reasons. They're not, for example, if you want to create a very successful big cannabis company, you're going through a lot of the, fundraising that, that you would in, not the same, but very similar to, tech ventures. And a lot of entrepreneurs that have been operating, under wrap, they don't have those skill sets, that experience, those networks that are going to be really important for building the big companies. So they're going to get shut out. So, so I think, from an equity standpoint and racial justice, I really think we need to look at ways that we can, support investment into these communities and these entrepreneurs, so that they've got a fighting shot at building these next, $1 billion plus companies. Because, they know their stuff inside and out. It's just a whole different way of going about, growing business. And so, I'm excited that there are companies like Vertosa, which is, another one that I've invested in. They're really proactively seeking out ways that they can support diverse founders who've been operating in this space and are now, creating, these legit businesses and looking at ways to scale. So for me, when I'm looking at investment opportunities in cannabis, I am actively looking for female founders. I am looking for, people of color. I'm looking for neurodiverse. I'm looking for people who come from, lower socioeconomic status and who really kind of been, doing that hustle. And now they want to be legit and they want to create something big and meaningful. And so, those are a lot of the, investors, that I'm looking for. I'm looking for the diverse founders who want to build, something big. And I think that we as a community and the market more generally, needs to really consider like how we support, these diverse founders. And then obviously, anyone who's in jail for these what were offenses, we need to correct that. So
Yeah, absolutely. And actually, touching on the investment portion, you are one of the top female angel investors in the United States. And how did you decide to start getting involved professionally with cannabis?
That's a good. You know what? I in my venture studio, Alchemist Collective, we had a partnership with Radical Insights, which is part of our portfolio at Prehype, which is a venture studio where I'm a partner, and our venture studio creates new businesses in partnership with large corporations. Oops, sorry about that. And so one of the things that we were working on with a large beverage company was scanning the market for cannabis companies that were building new businesses and inventing new products in the beverages space. So functional beverages, so when are just, they're everywhere now. You see them everywhere now, right? Like you can get water with collagen in it, water with protein in it. You can get, just about any kind of, beverage with something else that provides additional benefits. And so functional beverages have been growing like crazy. And so they were looking at CBD and THC investment and acquisition opportunities. So, so we really got to see what was going on across all of the markets. So, in Canada and the U.S., elsewhere, in terms of, what people were kind of really focusing in on. And so for I started to really get excited about cannabis-infused beverages. And I would actually, so before that, what I should say, that was not, that was the moment that I got super excited. Before that, I had come in at an early round in Ease, and I liked Ease because I liked the brand. I thought there some of the other people that were coming into that round I trusted as high quality investors. I came in with a firm that I do investments with called FJ Labs out of New York. They really, really know and excel in marketplaces, some other models as well, in other sectors, but they really, really take a leadership position in marketplaces. And, and they are very rigorous in their due diligence. And so I valued that kind of endorsement. And so I got excited about delivery first initially, but it was like partly the team and it was the brand and it was the market opportunity. And, California as a market alone was, worthy of an investment, even if they didn't expand into other states, it was still such a huge market. So I originally got excited about investing in Ease just because I saw this enormous opportunity. I was still pretty green, excuse the pun, in terms of, investing in cannabis. But that one seemed like, it wasn't, they weren't, cultivating, they weren't, manufacturing, they weren't producing. So I thought it was on the lesser end of friction point, so to speak, in terms of, business models and regulation and whatnot. I've learned a lot since then. And I'm so glad I started there because I learned a lot as an investor about, cannabis businesses. And then later, I was with a friend who was looking at creating a new venture fund around all of the different types of sectors and businesses that would typically fall within what's deemed as a morality clause of most venture capital firms. So most VCs will have something called a morality clause, and so it means that they can't invest in certain things. And oftentimes it will be things like, gambling or porn or things like cannabis. And, there are other things that are covered in that morality clause. But so that left a big, opportunity for investment into areas that, that they weren't going to touch. Some of them won't even touch, like, sex toys and things like that. So when she was doing that, she introduced me to Ben Larson at a party at her house in San Francisco. And, she said, this is definitely, one of the teams we would want to back. And, I had, they had some of their product there, which is basically, odorless, tasteless, colorless, emulsion, THC infusion, and so they were making cocktails with no alcohol. And, and just like, a couple drops of this, Vertosa. And so, I had this drink, which, tasted like a great mojito, but, less sugar, no alcohol, which sounded great for my waistline at the time. And so it tasted great. But then I just, I could feel the hit within the first, maybe 15 seconds, and it was just really nice. And, they were teaching me about it. And so I got to try the product right then. And I feel like as an investor, you can invest purely, on, the team and the market opportunity and traction that they're getting in the market. But, but for me, being able to actually experience the product, that just absolutely won me over. And so that in combination with having done this major research study, several 100-page report at the end of it, with this big beverage company, I was just like, I'm all in. I just see the opportunity everywhere. So, yeah, so that's, I think the combination of those two things just got me very, bullish overall, even though there was a lot of exuberance in the market, and it was clear that there were some players in the market that were just very opportunistic. There were some that just didn't have experience in CPG or industries related to cannabis that would help them have that kind of unfair advantage that you like to see in entrepreneurs based on their, personal or professional experience. So it was clear that there was going to be some kind of, shakeout in terms of the overall market. But it was also clear there were going to be some big winners, and I thought I could take a big swing and bet on some of those.
Yeah. Well, you were right on it, because when beverages came out to the market, it was really interesting to see some of the industry veterans poo-poo it, and they're like, who's going to drink that? Who's going to do these low dosages? And it was amazing. People love beverages, and especially now, because beverages 11 years ago in the cannabis industry were disgusting.
Yes, exactly.
But now,
Yes, I agree.
yeah, with the emulsification that they do,
Yeah.
and just the pure, like I always tell people, is there a favorite beverage that you have? Chances are you can find it infused.
Yeah.
And being that
Yeah,
you,
and I think,
oh no, what were you
go
going to
ahead,
say?
sorry.
You first.
Yeah. Well, I think, so this, like the water soluble stuff that, that Vertos is doing, I think, now you can actually just like taste the drink rather than, I think a lot of times it was like, you could really, really taste, the cannabis, and then you were trying to, put that cannabis taste into a taste that was supposed to taste like something else, and then you're combining it together, and it's just not a good mix. And so, with it being water soluble, it just means that it gives you so many more options. And because it's tasteless, you're tasting, the drink, and so I think, I think that there were a lot of, doubters, so to speak, and there probably, still are. But, I'll tell you what, like I've always got my, Lagunitas, like Hi-Fi in my fridge. I've always got my can in my fridge. Like they're in there all the time. And then I'm constantly trying, lots of other products. And I don't think people, like what I was saying to people at the time when they were like, oh, what, is that millennials are not drinking like prior generations. And, so they're drinking substantially less alcohol, I'm talking about. And then, they're predicting that, that the younger generations, are going to be drinking substantially less than them. So what you're talking about is a massive, massive reduction in alcohol consumption, but consumers still like, they want a kind of social lubricant, so to speak. They still kind of want like a little, sass to their, evening or whatever, or their Sunday. And the thing is, like, there are companies like Free Spirits, which is founded by a friend of mine, Mita, who's based in New York, and they use botanicals, to give you that kind of uplifting feeling or that mellowing feeling that that you can get from CBD. And so they're not using CBD or THC; they're using other botanicals. But that's a huge growing category as well, which just further validates that people want something that that just kind of complements or influences the kind of vibe that they want for the day or the evening, and yet they don't want alcohol where it has lots of negative attributes to it. So I just think I've thought from the research that we did, the combination of shifts that are happening, the lower consumption of alcohol, the increase of functional beverages, and the legalization of cannabis. I just thought it was a perfect storm for innovation in beverages.
Yeah, definitely. And Can, you mentioned them earlier. It was a really interesting study on how things can explode. Like in a very short time, I mean, they were one of the ones that were very notable for having a large celebrity investment even.
Yes, yeah, exactly. So with them, so I was one of their like early adopters. I loved the packaging. I loved the branding. Lemon and lavender for me just tastes like the best, like gin and tonic. And without all the bad stuff, you can have one, and like I don't even know, like I barely notice it, but I'm a little bit more mellow, and I have two. I'm just like I'm really easy, and so I've loved their products from kind of early on. I do have a code. I think it's Angel 20 or something. I don't know. I'll have to get it to you, but and people can get it 20% off on all canned products. But so I've been an ambassador for a long time. But I think they did a lot of things right in that they created something that just tasted great, and the packaging and the branding. And, I know the chief revenue officer over there, and, she had this incredible background and met the founders, at Burning Man, and then they kind of courted her, and, and eventually she joined them. So they were looking at, building a world-class team right from the get-go. And I think, securing investment from investors like, Gwyneth Paltrow and others, just really helped give them that bump in terms of, brand awareness and that helped consumers have that like willingness to try. They also did what I think a lot of effective cannabis companies do, and they would have like a lot of, try before you buy. So like, experiential stuff where you could like, try the product, because there's still a lot of people who are, hesitant or nervous because, maybe they had a bad edible experience. And so they're a little worried about, drinking a can of something, even when it's really, really, low dosages. But so, yeah, I think they've had a great run, and I'm excited to see where they take the business.
Yeah. All you need is one bad experience to make you wary. Yeah. But that's also where education comes in, where we actually get people to think about which milligram amount,
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it fluctuates, right? Like, this better than I do. And, I am grateful to you because, when I have questions, like you're my go-to, and
oh, thanks.
And I think, yeah, absolutely. And I think that, so many different things like, affect it, right? Like where you're at, like as a woman, where you're at in your cycle, like, how much, like, what did you eat or drink that day? How hydrated are you? Like, there's so many different, factors. So I do think that, but you should know, like, or you should figure out what your kind of range is, and so, so I just, I'm, I can have, like, with Hi-Fi, Lagunitas, I can have like a couple of their, 10 THC, and, and I'm good. But there are some people, I'll give that, they'll share a 5, and I think their 5 is 5 to 5 CBD THC.
Yep. And
I'll give that to some people, and, like half of a bottle, and they're like, whoa, okay, I'm good. So everybody's different. But, I went to law school in Oregon, and let's just say I refined my consumption there. And I remember coming back I was at someone's house in Berkeley, and they're like, and they said, we were smoking, and I said, are you from Oregon? And I said, oh my God. I said, well, I consider, like, why would you guess Oregon? Like, of all places, why do you think I'm from Oregon? And I said, I consider it my spiritual home. I went to law school there, but now I'm not from Oregon. And he's like, well, you just smoke like you're from Oregon. And I took that was like a badge of pride. I was
totally.
Like, I don't know. I know. And I was like, I'm San Francisco. And he's like, I don't know any women who can smoke like you. And I was like, yes. I was proud of that.
Yet another reason
like,
I love
totally, you. He's like, yeah, right. Well, thank you. Yeah. He's like, you're totally cogent. We're having these really deep intellectual conversations. He's like, and then we're having just like, normal conversations. He's like, you're right there with me. I'm like, yeah, because I know, like, my constitution and I'm good. So.
Yeah. It is interesting, with our personal body chemistry. When I teach my class on women and cannabis and I start talking about estrogen and cycles, I always see in the chat, like, some of the older ladies that are in class are like, this doesn't apply to me. And I'm like, listen, sister, don't give up. Just because you've gone through menopause does not mean that all the estrogen has left your body. You still peak and flow.
Yeah, right. Well, I'm just learning about all that now, like, because I'm at an age where I have to learn about it.
Oh, me too.
Yeah. So who knows? Like, it might change, but maybe not. I don't know.
Oh, yeah.
It's partly mindset too,
It is. It definitely is. And it's also, just being really aware of what you're using, because I remember when I first started working in the dispensary, that was when dabbing was first popular. And, and that was like, that blew my mind. But then I started getting into it because I wanted to understand, the different forms of concentrates, and that just jacked up my tolerance. So I once in a great while, I'll have a tasty dab, but I don't like I don't like going through the world smoking my joints like cigarettes, like where I can just go through a couple.
Yeah, yeah, right. Yep, for sure.
You know, my
For
lungs
sure.
can't hack it. But when
I
you're
agree.
when
Yeah,
you
no, I'm same. I'm same.
yeah, you know, and it's I definitely, you know, I love nerding out on the different ways of being able to use them and smell them and everything. But that's one thing that I always tell people. I'm like, you know, just be aware of variation and dosage, and you'll be in good shape. It's a wonderful way to actually be accountable for what's going on in your body, because I mean, well, yeah, before we got on this, we were both talking about how we're rushing from moment to moment, and it can be very ungrounding because you sometimes lose touch with, you know, the cause and effect of what you're putting in your body or what you're going through and why your body is, you know, acting funny. And
Yep. Yeah,
cannabis is
for sure.
a way for grounding and mindfulness. I was going to ask you too, because you have, you know, you've seen a lot of products, you've invested in a lot of companies. What are some of your favorite products right now that are just really intriguing to you?
Huh. Good question. I think I don't know. I don't know if it's intriguing, but like some of my favorite products are just some of the best sellers.
Mm-hmm.
And I think, there are reasons that they're best sellers. So like, I love the Hi-Fi Lagunitas, and I love Can, and those obviously in beverages, but I also love, is it Terra it's Terra, right? That does the chocolate covered espresso beans and the chocolate covered blueberry. Is that Terra?
Yeah, that's
You know what I'm
Terabytes,
talking
and
about?
that's under
Yeah.
Kiva's umbrella. Yeah.
Yeah. So I love, love, love those products. And I just think they're great because, you can throw them in your purse and you can, go out, wherever you are, and they taste great, and you can just, have one or more. I usually have five. And I know my friends are always like, how can you do that? But, and so I like that. I like the container because so many of the cannabis product, like that's one area of, I think, innovation. Like I understand why a lot of the cannabis companies need to kind of child-proof, a lot of the packaging, which I think is important. But, when you're shown you can't get into the packaging, it's a problem.
Yeah.
So, there needs to be some happy medium. So I think packaging needs to improve, or there's areas for innovation in packaging. But I really love those. I love some of the Silk Road pre-rolls. I'm trying to think of those. Like I would say during pandemic, those have been some of my go-to products. But I'm looking forward to all sorts of different products, from infused honey to all sorts of different kinds of infused products. Oh, I really love, and you introduced me to Mellows.
Oh,
You know, I
yeah.
like that's such a great product. I'm uh, diabetic. 'Cause I had just gestational diabetes, and unfortunately, it kind of hit me. So I don't have too many of them because so many of the edible products are sugar based. So I do think that there's a whole lot of us who are looking for edible products, and they exist, but I think that there's more room for growth for edible products that aren't sugary, and
Mm-hmm.
that's also true in beverages as well. So I don't want the sugar. I do want it to taste good, and I don't want it to have a lot of other crap in it. I want it to be as clean as possible. And so I do think that I'm starting to see more of it, but I do think that that's a whole area that's ripe for growth, because if you're somebody who's really into fitness or your figure or your overall health, or you've got special concerns, like, diabetes or other conditions where you need to keep your carbs or your, sugars low, then we need to be a bit more creative about, some of the edibles. But, you can dab, you can use tinctures, but it would be nice to see more edibles that are healthier overall, rather than some of the ones that I really love, because they're so chocolatey and yummy. I think there's some opportunity for creative entrepreneurs in that category.
Yeah, I agree. One that I really like are the level tablets. I like the sublinguals, especially.
Yes.
Yeah, and the CBG actually really helps me focus.
Yes. You know what?
Hmm.
That reminds me, I haven't had any recently, but at the beginning of the pandemic, I was using sublinguals a lot, and I agree, I was having a similar effect. So I need to dive back in there. I haven't done it for a while.
Yeah, it really calms my mind. It's because when I'm busy during the day, and if I get a little overwhelmed, all of a sudden I get like a deer caught in the headlights.
Yes.
And CBG just
Well,
brings me in my body. What are you gonna say?
totally. No, I was just going to say, like, I was telling you, before that, recently it's just felt very frenetic, and I was, talking to a friend, and it's not quite overwhelmed, but borderline overwhelmed with just like calls and emails and transitioning into quote unquote, normal life after having been vaccinated, and all just like, and I'm a single mom, and I'm an entrepreneur, and I'm an investor, and like, just juggling all this stuff. And so for me, if I want to be at my best, if I can, use a sublingual and get the dosage right, then what it does is it allows me to kind of calm myself and to really focus in on, okay, these are the top 3 things that matter today. Everything else may or may not get done, but it's not in the top 3, so I'm not going to worry about it. And so, and that's incredibly liberating, and I think it really contributes to, overall wellness. And so, so those are, I think, when you can get it right like that, it's so helpful. When I was living in Michigan, all these moms who, well, a lot of them just wanted to lose weight, but a lot of them were like always frazzled. And so a lot of them were starting to take Adderall, and they didn't need Adderall, right?
Mm-hmm.
And they were, a lot of them were doing it because they were like, I just feel constantly like in a fog, overwhelmed. I can't get the focus that I need. And so, so some of them, I, turned on to CBD as an option, and obviously, and you can speak to it more than I can, but, the right combination of THC and CBD. And, and they all said, like, oh, my God, that's a game changer. And, of course, they wouldn't tell anyone. It was funny. They were happy to tell people, like, yeah, I got a prescription for Adderall, like, on the black market. They're happy to talk about that, but they were not happy to talk about, the CBD, THC, which is legal. So it was just kind of funny, but it got them off of these like nastier, pharmaceuticals, and gave them a much, better effect. And in addition to the focus, they had a sense of calm, which you allegedly don't get with Adderall. I don't know. It's not something I take.
I took Adderall for a very short period when I started working again after chemo, because I had chemo brain still. So my doctor was like, well, let's give you some Adderall. And
yeah.
I was like at work grinding my teeth. I was like, how does anyone want to do this?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
It was super unpleasant. But when you're saying this and the impact it has on people and their productivity, it brings to mind too, like, I've been this year, I'm working with colleagues to really start looking at, we've talked about, education helps create good sound policy, but another thing that does is pressure from the public. And the perception of policymakers, of people who use cannabis, is still incredibly skewed. So I always tell people, like, well, I'm not in the dispensary anymore, but when people would come in and they'd be upset about the prices or the packaging, and they'd be like, it's you, it's the companies that create these products. It's like, no, these are, we would really like to not have to do any of this and charge you as much as we have to. It's taxation, it's, rules around packaging, and this is where the onus is on the public. And that's when I tell them, I'm like, your policymakers need to hear from you, because you hold their jobs in your hands. So
Yeah.
it's a call to action for the public to say, I'm a productive member of society. I'm professional. I pay my taxes. I use cannabis, and I vote.
Yeah. Yes, exactly. Exactly. And I actually think, the taxation is actually helping with legalization, right? Where all these, counties and states, have been, struggling, or just need to find, new sources of income to, support aging populations and improvement in schools and all that. They need other sources of taxes, but at the same time, some of them are so ridiculously high that it's cost prohibitive from a lot of people who would really, benefit from cannabis products.
Right. Yeah. Taxation is essential because we need that to be able to support our communities. But when you're looking at certain cities where if you tally up the tax, it can be more than 40%.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
We got to sit
Yeah.
down and have a talk about that.
Totally. And that's kind of going back to some of those, I was focusing more on the kind of friction points of regulation in terms of, business, but the taxation element is critical as well. So I think it makes sense to have higher tax rates, for cannabis related, business and products, but you can't kill a market that you're trying to create. You're killing it before, there's even a market. So, so we need to do, so many different markets. When you're creating a new market, they get entirely subsidized, and they're not paying any, Amazon's not paying any taxes at all, right?
Yeah.
That, or at least not, in the way that, that some of these other are. And you can say it's because, they're producing, so many jobs and contributing to the economy and all that kind of stuff. Well, you have to look at these new markets as, what are the most tax efficient ways for investment to occur and for entrepreneurship to occur, because that's the way you create, new markets. So if we tax, them so heavily, then you minimize demand and from consumers, and then you're also making it cost prohibitive for, these businesses to survive. And it educates or at least, misinforms, consumers around the products as well, because you're right. Like, they don't necessarily understand, the kind of cost breakdown. It's not, they don't see it like when they go into a restaurant, they can see the tax separated out, So when they're, looking at the product, they're just looking at, the overall expense. So, yeah, there's definitely a lot of lobbying and pressure that we can apply to have, sensible taxation for sure.
And when we're talking about these companies and, a lot of companies, in order to stay afloat, they don't, they'll go to, friends and family to raise money just because it is difficult to do the fundraising. But if someone were looking to embark on fundraising for their company, what are some key tips that you would give them?
Yeah. So I would say, have a rock star team that has what I call unfair advantage. And rock star team isn't just like you and your co-founder, or you and, some contractors that are working for you, or employees that are working for you. Those are definitely part of the team. And, the more skilled and competent they are, the better. But it also includes your advisors, and it includes other investors. And so, primarily at early stage investing, what makes something backable or fundable, is the team and also the market opportunity. But the team, you're looking at, like, do they have particular insights or experience or personal and professional stories that makes you, confident that this team can create, what we call a competitive moat, that they can, they have unique access to networks or people or an understanding of the sector so that they will be able to grow this business better than anybody else. So really make sure that team you're pulling together, and again, that includes your advisors and other investors, what you're essentially trying to do is de-risk the investment for the investor. It's just like really nailing your pitch. So having a great pitch deck that tells your story in a really compelling and engaging way. It's really concise, clearly demonstrates your why in, starting this business and why you're going to win. But not selling either. It's like, people think, when you're pitching, you're selling. You're really not. You want to get to an outcome, but the outcome, in those initial pitches is really about building a relationship. Make them want more, make it believable. So, a lot of times if you're selling, you can oversell. So, so I think having a really strong pitch deck, nailing your pitch, in Angel Club, we do pitch practice every week so that people can with investors, so that you can really, really nail your pitch. And then also, starting to build relationships with investors well before you ever want to pitch for money, because, if you go to investors and you ask their advice or for their input and say, hey, I'm not raising right now, but I am at X stage of, of building, my business, I would love to hear your perspective on X. Most investors, want to be helpful. So, that you can do cold outreach. You want to have a really succinct but catchy and not clickbaity subject line. You want to have a really concise, highly personalized email, like why should that investor be interested in your business and in you? And you can do those kind of cold outreaches. And I have cold outreach templates that entrepreneurs can customize and personalize to kind of nail those cold outreaches. But if you're building relationships well in advance of the time that you need the money, then, it's a lot easier to say, like, hey, I've been keeping you up to date with my progress. Now I'm actually entering fundraising. Would love to have a call with you about, my plans for the business. It's a lot easier than stranger danger that some people experience, when they don't know who they're talking to. So, and you can do that. You can build those relationships by researching online. Like, we have a massive investor database in Angel Club, but you can also find them, other places like NFX Signal and other places where there's an investor list and databases. And then you go through there and see what they're investing in. Some of them are very public about what they're investing in, but, a lot of the databases will show what they invest in. So if they've invested in other, cannabis businesses, or, psychedelics or other regulated industries, then, as long as your business isn't directly competitive to what they've already invested in, then they could be a good investor for you. You have to check sector, stage, geography, average check size, but you're going to create an ideal investor profile, and then you're going to do your research to see who fits that profile. And then, just start engaging with them on social media, be of value to them, like share articles and insights when they're posting on certain topics. And just start, it's a human relationship. So, so I think, you get all those things, well, and build a really damn good business, then, your chances are pretty good.
Well, and you were mentioning Angel Club. You talk more about that, because you've been doing a lot of mentoring and support and coaching with people this past year, haven't you?
Oh yeah, a whole lot. Yeah, when Black Lives Matter was really, really kind of, kicking off, I sat back and I thought, I'm from Detroit, it's an 87%, Black community. What else can I do besides not be an asshole, to support my community? And so I thought, like, okay, what else can I do? And so I decided to start these open office hours, and so I did that. And these open office hours were really just to help, people of color, Black entrepreneurs, build their businesses and get the backing they need to grow their businesses. So, so I started to do that, and then it kind of grew much bigger. So I started to do clubhouse sessions, and it's like a fundraising Q&A. And then that's open to, anyone and everyone, although, I do focus on diversity, equity, and inclusion in terms of how I curate the moderators, I curate the questions, and also how I, make my investment. So, on Monday, I had 1,700 people, that I mentored in a room on Clubhouse. And I do that room every Monday, and then I have other people who do that room on other days so that, that mentorship can happen at scale. And then in Angel Club, so that's in Angel Club and Clubhouse, and then angelclub.com, I do that on a weekly basis on Fridays at 10 a.m. And then and that's for pitch practice. We do master classes. We're doing one on Startup Law 101. There's loads of different kinds of master classes, personal branding. And then we have a monthly group call. And a lot of times the group calls are really great because people will ask questions that, you hadn't thought of asking, but they're answers that you need to know. So I've been doing a whole lot of that mentorship, and now I'm finding ways to do it, in a more scalable way, since I can't do, loads of one-to-ones. I do some one-to-ones, but I do that all through Angel Club, which is at angelclub.com.
That's awesome. And you have a podcast too.
Yes. And we call them riffs because it's kind of like, what we're doing. We're riffing, right?
Yeah.
And so it was so funny because, my family in Italy, they're like riffs, like a guitar. And I'm like, yeah, kind of, but with voice. But they're like, we don't know this term. But, and so, I've interviewed all, sorts of different people in, business areas that, that I am excited by and that I think others, will be inspired by. And so, it's from authors to serial founders, to investors, thought leaders of different kinds. And so I do those on video. Some are audio only. And then I do, transcripts for those who have any kind of impairments.
That's awesome. I mean, it's amazing how efficiently you're able to spread your information and be able to touch people in so many different ways. And I'm really surprised that you're not totally going crazy, because that's a lot of work. That's a lot of work and dedication.
It is a lot of work.
Yeah.
It's a lot of work, and thanks to CBD and THC, I'm not going, and meditation and the hikes, I'm not going crazy. But more likely it has to do with the fact that, I do have a really great team. And so, they're able to, I'm super, creative and highly ambitious in terms of what I like to put out in the world. I want to make my time here count. And so they, they're great about creating, systems and helping me, keep this kind of production machine going. So it's not, I'm out there in the front, but there's some great people, with me to make it all happen.
That's awesome. And I have one last question for you, because we went through our time so quickly. I can't believe it. But
yeah, and it's 11:11, so it's a good time.
Yeah, very auspicious.
Yeah.
What do you see in the future with cannabis? Like you see trends, you see how industries grow, and with everything that you've seen in the past few years, what's your hypothesis?
Yeah, so I think it's going to become a lot more professionalized, and what I mean by that is I think you're going to see a lot more of the bigger, more traditional players, whether those are individuals or big corporates, really start to kind of permeate the market. I also think that more of the fintech solutions and kind of CRM point of sale solutions will will both consolidate and become better and bigger, because the banking aspect is still a problem given, there's no federal legislation. I do think that, I don't know if that's going to change in the next few years, but it's definitely going to change. But until then, we need some better technology to make these businesses, more efficient, because they face all these, different issues like we talked about in terms of taxation, et cetera. I think that we're going to see a lot more people enter the workforce in cannabis industries. And so, so there's such high turnover in certain, sectors within cannabis. I think that, as people kind of get skilled up, and it's already happening, we'll just start to see a more kind of professional employment workforce, which will make a lot of these businesses operate more smoothly. So on the one hand, it sounds boring. I think we're going to see more efficiency and, and consolidation and professionalism. But I do also get concerned of, like, companies like Monsanto and others, getting into the sector and the kind of influence that they might have. But I think some of that is inevitable. So we need to really figure out the best way to manage that. But I think we're just going to continue to see lots and lots and lots of product innovation and products of all different kinds. I think culturally, we're going to see a lot more mainstreaming. We might even see more regulation in terms of open smoking, because there are lots of people who, complain about, the smell and things like that in places where it is legal. But I think we'll continue to see, legalization roll out, across the states and counties, and hopefully some improvements in terms of, overall policy, whether that, has to do with racial justice in terms of those who are incarcerated, and or, the way that we're enabling, licensing, for example. There are some, states and counties that are looking at, who get licenses to operate, and they're looking at that with, racial equity, in mind. And so I think I'm hoping that we're going to take a, conscious capitalism approach to cannabis, and that we're going to create an industry that has some healthy aspects to growing, a new market. And I see some of that happening. I also see some bad examples, but I tend to be more positive. So I'm hoping that the good people will speak more loudly and act, more vigorously for creating, the type of industry that we think, will be most helpful to society.
Yeah, I think we have a unique opportunity to change the way we do business and have it just like how tech influenced the way we did business outside of even the tech industry, that cannabis can do that, especially around, compassionate capitalism, because we can have abundance and be able to take care of our communities and have things be accessible.
Yeah.
If people want to reach out to you, how would they reach out to you? Through websites, social media, stuff like that?
Yeah, sure. So my personal website is at angelgambino.com, ANGELGAMBINO.com. And an email address that I give out publicly is info@angelgambino.com. I do check it every day, and my team also helps me manage it. My Twitter, where I'm very active, is @Gambino. And I get every tweet about Childish Gambino you could ever imagine. They think it's his handle. And it's my son's favorite artist, so I don't mind, But my Instagram is just @Angel Gambino, and Clubhouse is @Angel Gambino. So I'm most active on Twitter, Instagram, Clubhouse, and via, my website. And then people can also reach me at angelclub.com.
Awesome. And for our listeners out there who want to follow Planted with Sara Payan, we are www.plantedwithsara.com. On Instagram and Twitter and Facebook, we are Planted with Sara. And you can listen to our podcast on Spotify, Pandora, Apple, Google, Amazon, Stitcher, wherever you listen to your favorite podcasts, you can find Planted. Angel, thank you so very much for being here today. It's always a treat to be able to talk to you, and I miss you because we haven't seen each other in a while. I'm just so glad that you had the time to come on the podcast.
Yeah, no, I feel grateful for the opportunity, and we will definitely, now that we're fully vaccinated, have a proper catch-up.
Yes.
But no, I'm really appreciative of the opportunity. It's always great to talk, and especially, one of my favorite topics. So.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And for all of you out there, tune in. Remember, Planted is now twice a month. So as we continue on with our day, just, stay safe. It's a crazy world out there, so be good to each other and stay curious. Until next time.